This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hello, my beautiful friend. Welcome to A Time to Care the Caregivers podcast. I'm Isabel Melgarejo, your host, and today I have the delight to introduce you to Christopher Hensley. He is a financial advisor, and he's going to be talking to us about budgeting and how to prepare for everything we have to pay when we're caregivers. Welcome, Christopher.
Isabel, thank you for inviting me on this show. I am super excited to be here. I think what a great topic to dive into. Looking forward to it.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. So I wear a couple different hats, right? So I am a financial advisor. My company's Houston First Financial Group, and I focus on working with retirees 55 and up. Although I've been doing this for over 20 years now. So a lot of the people I started with, they're well on the other side of retirement, right? They're living off of their income, their Social Security, their pension. And so a lot of the life experiences that we're seeing them go through have changed. And so caregiving's one of them that's come online that we've kind of delved in. I also am a podcaster as well, right? So Money Matters podcast, that is what I've been doing for the last 10 years. We hit our decade mark. Actually, I think we're just over 11 years now. So we hit hit our 11-year mark there. Last year is one of the things I did to celebrate is I challenged myself to go on to other podcasts. I did 30 different guesting spots last year, completely different than being the host, right? I switched the microphone around. And so I liked it, right? I liked it. And so I think I'm just going to keep going with it. So the podcast hat, doing my financial planning practice, and I'm also a public speaker. So I'll go out and do worksite education talks as well.
We had a wonderful conversation a few days ago, and I'm pretty sure we're going to have another fantastic conversation today with everybody who's listening. Where do you start planning financially when you're taking care for somebody else?
Yeah. So it's always start with yourself first, right? It's like when you're in the airplane and they tell you to put the oxygen mask on first because you won't be able to help other people. Starting with yourself is a very, very good first step, right? You want to make sure, what's your bandwidth? What capacity do you have to help before you raise your hand and say, hey, I'm going to help, right? Or most often you're not raising your hand. It's something that just happens and you've got that new role, right? Ideally, you want to assess what you and your family's ability to help is, right? That can be financial. It can also be things that don't have a dollar sign attached to them, but like picking up prescriptions, helping with food, helping take mom or dad to the doctor. I'm an only child. So when I'm looking for a network of siblings, right, to start looking, to help, it's not all the weight falls on me. But for people who come from larger families, this might also be a facilitated conversation with their family members, right? It may be sitting down either like we're doing virtually if your brother or sister is located out of state, or physically having that difficult conversation with family members. The parents are there to bring them on board, really to see what is needed. And then from the finance part of it, right, the budgeting part of it, getting a good snapshot of where you're at, right? If you're kicking in to help pay for mom and pop's healthcare or what have you, whether it's housing expense, dining, all of that stuff, you kind of got to know where you're at. Can you afford to do this, right? There are some possibilities of when we're in transition, right? maybe hitting pause on the retirement savings. Okay, my heart skipped a beat there. As a retirement specialist, that's kind of like the least tool in the toolbox I want you to use. I don't want you to turn off your retirement savings. But there are times in life where if your income doesn't meet what you're trying to do, you might have to dial it up and dial it on. So that's one of those things that you might look at. The main thing that I'm leaving the listeners with today is, though, taking a financial snapshot, sitting down with a good old fashioned yellow legal pad, assets, liabilities, income, expenses, and going down those columns with you and your significant other to see where you're at realistically, right? Financially. And remember, that's a snapshot, right? This stuff changes on a daily basis. It changes on a monthly basis. But if you don't know where you're at now, you really can't move forward in the future. And then there's
So
budgeting for, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I want to jump there because
Yes. Yeah.
you're talking about the yellow pad, and probably everybody, including myself, cringed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't want to see my finances. And I know, like, when you're doing great, it's like, okay, how much money? Oh, it is exciting. Like, you put on like a pair of like a jacket or something. Oh, here's like $20. It's exciting. But when you actually go and see your bank account, that can be a challenge for many of us. How do you break that barrier into like, okay, these are the numbers. I want to see them first so I can start working?
For me, when I do a full financial plan with a client, it's non-negotiable, right? So I'm not one of these advisors that, hey, give me a couple $100,000 and I'll throw it in the market for you. I won't even work with a client unless they full disclosure, right? So that we're doing a budget, we're looking at all of the paperwork, everything that they've, when you get those statements, those envelopes in the mail and you don't want to open them and they end up on a dresser, right? We're looking at all of that stuff. And you really want to start anybody that you ask for help financially, you want to start a relationship that way. You don't really want somebody who's just going to rush into it, right? And besides you and your spouse, if you hire a financial advisor, that's going to be the third person in the world that knows your finances as well as you do, right? So the fact that they're hitting pause and saying, no, we really got to get into the weeds here and look at the numbers. Now, I do let them off the hook in the sense that they have to sit down together or individually and come up with a budget. And even that exercise of doing the budget can be painful, right? So I kind of gauged, how was that exercise of doing that? Was that difficult? Was it easy? Some people, it's super easy. They know exactly how their expenses are. But when we get into retirement, or when we get into a situation like caregiving where you're in transition and your normal routine is disrupted, those numbers are going to change. So I always let them know a budget is a snapshot in time, but it's supposed to be dynamic. It's supposed to be something that changes as we go, and that's kind of baked into it. I make them do it because you have to know. And then when it comes to caregiving, right, I would even go a little bit further and say, you kind of got to know what the expenses are of your loved ones to be able to step in and help, right? And that doesn't even mean financially with you giving money towards it. It's really when we have things like cognitive decline and where people literally forget to pay their bills and their finances. We're talking about keeping the lights on. We're talking about having groceries come, right? We're talking about the things that keep that household running. You have to know where they sit. It could be a difficult conversation if you haven't approached it with them and you've got those roles of mom and dad or parents, and you may not have been on that side where you're asking them, hey, I need to know about your finances. But what I've found is if we don't have those difficult conversations with those parents or those loved ones, there may be benefits out there that they're not aware of, like if they're ex-military and there's VA benefits, or if they had a pension from where they used to work before they retired, or if they have retiree health care and we have to look at Medicare and that additional health insurance and coordinate the healthcare pieces of it, right? So all of that's a job without a paycheck, right? So making sure that we have good information before we start out of the gate trying to see where we can help. we all love our parents, right? But we want to make sure that we have the information and the knowledge. Budgeting is where it starts at, budgeting for yourself, and then getting an idea of what their finances are. What have they already done, right?
Usually when I talk with my clients, that's something that I talk with, and I help them paint that picture in the long term of where they see themselves as caregivers and as individuals and who they are, what they do as a whole. But you can paint a wonderful picture, and then you have to check if your bank account is going to support that, because many times we see ourselves aging in place, having 300 servants all the
Right,
time.
right.
Can we afford it? Can we afford having someone coming over and cooking for us? Can we afford having someone driving us places? Can So those are things that we need to consider. And is it a reality, or how can we make it work? And that's what I love about you, because you're like, what are all those things? And the more detail you can go through this process, it's going to be better, because the little things can add to a lot.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when if you allow me to piggyback on that, because what I'm thinking about is long-term care insurance was one of the things that just popped into my head when you were making that statement. Because often you're here when you said aging in place and having 300 people waiting on you, right? People might have a misconception there. And having done this for the last 20 years, the idea of aging in place wasn't out there all the time. It used to be that people would think that they would have to go to that nursing home, right? It's not even called that anymore. That was the idea. We're going into a retirement home, or we're going into a nursing home. And I could tell you that after COVID, the rate of people who are aging in place, because if you remember, there were occupancy rates there. They weren't letting people leave to go to these facilities. This is one of those areas that was highly prone to that. The numbers of people who are aging in place at their home has skyrocketed, right? So when we talk about long-term care insurance, the insurance that you would go out to get to help pay for some of these expenses that aren't covered from your traditional healthcare company, right? Or aren't covered by Medicare. It's like, how do we pay for that stuff that's not covered in those policies? Long-term care can be a good answer to that. Now, when I say that, having done this for 20 years, when I first started, there were many, many companies in the long-term care market. And as baby boomers started reaching retirement age and actually using the insurance, surprise, surprise, what do insurance companies do? Those companies whittled from like 20 different companies to about 3 or 4 traditional long-term care companies. And a lot of them are super expensive to get, right? So if you have a policy, you're paying a lot for it. I've had stuff that I've worked with clients that now, when the industry's kind of gone back, they're making offers for them to water their long-term care insurance down. They're saying, well, you're still paying on this, but we'll lower the amount covered if we can lower your monthly premium, right? So, and I usually advise people not to do that, because they're kind of like changing the deal on you in mid work, right? Which is usually never a good thing. So if they're trying to offer to come and buy you out on a long-term care policy, you should always look twice on that. Yeah.
So when is a good time to get long-term care insurance?
When you don't need it. So, and that's a good answer for a lot of insurance products, right? So I'm kind of laughing here, because there are long-term care is a little bit easier to get than other insurance products. There are certain things that will knock you out of the box for it. So heart issues, but life insurance, on the other hand, things like high cholesterol that everybody gets, those usually are kind of you won't be able to get it, or you'll have to pay very expensive rates. So little bit easier to get the long-term care insurance, but there are certain things that will prevent you from getting it. And then there's the cost that's associated with it, right? So I always say the age range of people that I work with, which is 55 and up, so pre-retiree, that is when it should be coming on your radar. You should start looking at it. Your employer sometimes offers a group long-term care plan. It's not across the board, but there is a kind of this popular thing where some companies are adding that as a benefit. So that and then usually that's a cheap way to get it, right, through an employer group plan. But if you're not able to do that at 55 and up, I would start looking and making sure that's in there. And if you're younger than that, or even if you're 55 and up and you haven't had that conversation with mom and dad, this is important as a caregiver to know if they have a supplemental policy that will come in and come around Medicare and pick up those additional costs, right? So if it's not like a short stint in the hospital, and it's maybe if they get something like a Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or dementia or something where there's a cognitive decline, but an extended period, that's what those types of policies are out there for. Not ever, I would like to say a lot of people have them, but not a lot of people do. So we end up having to do workarounds. And that's when, you're looking at family members chipping in, or if it doesn't come from a long-term care policy, it has to come from your retirement bucket. So when I'm solving for retirement, how much do I need in retirement? Don't have long-term care insurance, you need to add that back in to how much you're going to need to retire with if you don't want to be a financial burden on the kids, right?
If you have kids.
That's true. If you're, yeah, and you may not have kids at all, and then it's up to you to figure this out, right? It's a even more important reason to have it solved before getting to that point, right?
One of the things that I encounter often is people come and they think that Medicare is gonna pay for everything. And surprise, surprise, it won't.
Medicare, I encourage people to learn as much about Medicare as they can. I've got a couple of good books. I'm going to grab a book real quick here that I always recommend that to people who are trying to who ask me about Medicare. This is Get What's Yours, Medicare by Philip Mahler. Now, he is the co-author of also a book called Get What's Yours, and this one's on Social Security. He did it with Lawrence Kotlikoff. Lawrence Kotlikoff had a PBS show, right? He also ran for president, I think, one year, so people might know him from that. But I encourage people to learn as much as they can about Medicare because it is not easy. That book that I just recommended, they open with a CPA and an attorney who are, I think it's intuitive. I'll go and learn about Medicare. And they end up making some of the biggest mistakes ever. It can be extremely complex. It's like Social Security. It's the rules change, and it's something that affects us. And if we don't know about it, it's really hard to make decisions. So I encourage people to educate themselves about it. You mentioned, yes, Medicare does not cover everything. Some people's financial plan is, well, I'll just let Medicaid kick in and pay for everything. Well, if that's your plan, you literally have to spend down almost all of your assets. And then what they do cover is literally a very narrow scope of what they will cover at that point, right? That's not a good plan. So knowing, what options you have, if you're lucky enough to have retiree healthcare insurance, some of that stuff can be covered in there. But then as we get into those things that are considered the assisted daily living, the eating, clothing, feeding ourselves, paying our bills, shopping for ourselves, right? When those things start to break down, that kicks it into a different type of expense and a different, they look at it differently, right? So kind of knowing as some of these things progress with our loved ones, how to come at it and what help's available, you kind of got to get a crash course, right? On how some of this stuff works to be able to make good decisions on it. Yeah.
Again, we fall into what do you want? And if you want to age in place, if you want a comfortable living with I don't know, maybe even having one of these trips for people with any kind of disabilities, you can still have those trips. Probably not if you're bedridden, but you can still do things. But if you're putting all your eggs on Medicaid, then you're not going to have those pleasures in life.
100%. So Medicaid, that is not a good option. It may be the only option for some people, but it's not a good option. So if we have control, leverage point, that's one, right? So just talking about these things, getting a plan that's not that, anything better that is better than that, as far as being able to proactively put something together. And the idea of aging in place, that's really what I'm going to say we all want, but a lot of people, you think about it, you buy a house, you live in that house for years, and then we're asking you to go somewhere else I mean, I would feel that way because I want to stay at my house. And so the idea of, well, what does that look like? You're going to have to spend money to put ramps in and put bars in the house. You can't just stay there if you've got mobility issues and you become a danger, right, to yourself or you're physically injured. So budgeting for that type of thing and knowing that we're going to have to make some changes even if we age in place. And then at some point, we'll probably need skilled care where even our loved ones aren't nurses, they're not doctors. They may not be equipped to pick us up and put us in a bathtub or give us the right prescriptions without messing up, right? Because we're not doctors. We don't know, So even having that, if you're not going to go someplace else for that, and you're bringing those healthcare professionals in, anytime you put a couple of initials behind there, like an RN, or you put a couple of initials behind their name, and then what you're paying is going to go up, right? So it's difference between just having a helper there at the house to help you, or having a skilled nurse coming in and doing things that you have to do when you get to a certain level of a disease or disability, things that we don't like to talk about them, but we need to talk about them before they just all of a sudden happen and they're on our radar, get them on our radar early. Yep.
Yeah, and you want to be considering those things. And even if you want to age in place, I have a client and her home is full of stairs. So, okay, you want to age in place. You can stay there, but you will have to make a decision when you lose mobility. So that's the time. And you want to start these conversations before it becomes a need, like something that you need to do right now. Because if you already have a strategy of, I am going to pay out of pocket a new home that already has all these infrastructure within the house for me to be there, and then I'm going to sell. So, okay, I can do that. I know I'm going to need this amount of money. I already know where these homes are located. Very easy to do. I'm starting to lose mobility, so I need to start making my home proof of, I don't know how they call it, like
ready, like make it ready for
yeah.
aging in place there. Yeah. I've had very real conversations all the time with clients just like this. And if you've ever seen how much an elevator costs to put inside of a 2-story house, just imagine smoke coming out of my ears right now. It is super duper expensive. So think about it. If you are aging in place and you go through the trouble of putting an elevator and it's costing, thousands, almost hundreds of thousands, or over 100,000 for one elevator, and then somebody passes and then you turn around and sell the house, what are the chances that somebody else wants or needs an elevator? Are you going to get your money back on that? So the idea of
Probably not.
If you've got stairs in the house and you can spend much less to get one of these machines where you just install it on the stairs and you sit in it and then it just kind of just ramps you up the stairs, much cheaper solve than putting an elevator in the house, right? And then thinking about if you do end up selling the house down the road, right? Will you ever get your money back for that investment? So not to say it's not worth it if you've got the money and you want to do it, but really getting an idea of what that might look like realistically, right?
And maybe aging in place means moving somewhere else. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stay in the home you've been living for the past 30, 40 years.
I love that. I call that concept right sizing, not downsizing. I encourage people as they age and they get, if you think about it, the age group that I deal with, usually the kids are up and out of the house, but when they were younger and married, they got the 2-story house with the 5 bedrooms and just the utilities to keep that going. Super expensive, right? And so right sizing later in life might mean selling that, pulling the equity to give you additional costs for retirement and long-term care expenses, right? Healthcare is going up. That's something that's going up. It's super expensive as we age. And getting into a smaller place where the utilities are lower. There's less things that you're responsible to. Maybe you enjoyed mowing the yard when you were younger, but as you get older, you have those mobility issues. It's just not on that list of things that I like to do, right?
Or maybe you just don't want to do it anymore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I call that right sizing. I like that.
I used to collaborate with this professional organizer back in the day when I was doing that. She was an empty nester and she decided to upsize
Mhm.
because now she had her grandkids visiting often and she was taking care of them, and she was running a couple of business from her home, so she needed a lot of space. And instead of having converting the rooms into office space, she decided to just buy a bigger house, run a couple business from there, and still have those rooms available for the grandkids. So
So everybody's situation is unique and different. And so yeah, that might look different to somebody, especially if you're running a business and you've got all those grandkids, right? If you're responsible for others and other people, you might need the bigger space. So it is different for each and every person. Yeah.
and you have to have those conversations with yourself and with your parents. I think it is very important that you, first of all, you understand where you want to be, and secondly, how you're going to be supporting your loved ones.
As those things progress and you are having to step in and do some of the financial stuff, what we started with was mentioning kind of getting a picture of what their finances look like. So I'm a retirement income certified professional. I'm also a certified estate and trust specialist. And so I always encourage people making sure that they have their estate planning in place, right? And so this may be something that mom and dad, or mom comma dad, right, separately, I'm a single parent mom, right? However your situation is, they may have had legal paperwork done for estate planning many, many years ago. But if you've had any deaths, births, adoptions, divorce, right, anything that's a life-changing event where they may need to go back and re-examine the documents, this is a good time for them to do that and to share that information with you, right? And they may not have done that in the past. They may have done that, kept that conversation away from the kids. But as we age and we get closer, and if the kids are the executor or executrix and they're required or expected, right, to step into that role as well, these are the conversations that we need to have. Things like the financial power of attorney, things like a healthcare surrogate where you're making decisions for the parent. And you want to do this before you need it again, right? Because by the time they have cognitive decline, are they even able to sign of sound mind these legal documents? So we put those things in place prior to this stuff happening. So we don't want to use them, but we want to make sure we have them if we need them, right? Good thing to remind people of all the time.
Yeah, it is important. Is there anything else you would like to share with everybody today?
Yeah, I think I love what you're doing with your clients and having these conversations and helping and acting as a guide to get them through this experience. Caregiving is rough, right? I would just start with, I would leave you with what I started with, is making sure to put yourself first. If you're in a caregiver role, that self-care. If you don't do that, it usually comes back to bite you in the butt, right? So you can act like you're not going to do that, but if you don't give yourself that time and that bandwidth to do that, that's when you're at your best, when you're making sure to take care of yourself first. So I think I would leave us with that. I would encourage people to listen to podcasts, www.moneymatterspodcast.com, which you are going to be on very shortly, because
Yeah.
we're gonna swap seats here, and I'll be interviewing you. So I'm looking forward to that. And for anybody who's interested, they could go to www.moneymatterspodcast.com for.
So you can download the podcast in everywhere you can listen podcasts, right?
Yep. It's on Libsyn. It's on, I don't even know if they call it. I used to be Apple. I think it's iTunes now, or they may have changed the name. And then YouTube. We're getting a lot of traction through YouTube now, the video portion of it.
I may surprise everybody with YouTube next year. Maybe.
We did it as an afterthought. We were like, well, we have video. Let's put the video out there. And it turns out YouTube's like the second largest search engine in the world. So we exceeded our downloads off of Libsyn through YouTube. And then I was like, okay, I got to pay attention to this. I got to get this video thing down, because we started long form, just straight audio only in a radio station. And this is where we're at now, right?
People love video, so that's why I've been considering it. So I may or may not bring video next year. And if I
Love it.
do bring video, I'll invite you again so everybody can see your face.
I love it. I love it. We got something to look forward to then. So
Thank you so much for joining us. And for everybody out there, go ahead and follow Christopher Hensley. You can reach out to him where?
www.houstonfirstfinancialgroup.com is my for-profit business. And then moneymatterspodcast.com is the website. And there's going to be links and they can get in touch through there. Yep.
We'll make sure to link everything, to put those books in there in the show notes. So if anybody wants to go and read those books as well, we'll put those links in the show notes. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Have a good rest of the day there.
Thank you.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.